Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, honoured guests, friends and colleagues. My name is Michael Newman. I'm the Chief Executive of the Association of Jewish Refugees, and thank you for joining us for our service to commemorate the anniversary of Kristallnacht. Like so many communities, events and gatherings, our plans have been disrupted by the pandemic. And so, despite in the end being unable to live stream today's event or join together physically to mark this solemn history, it is heartening that so many of you have joined us virtually for this occasion of remembrance and reflection. We commemorate today the November 1938 pogrom, the catastrophe before the catastrophe, the profound and seminal date in the prelude to the Holocaust that symbolized the terror and inhumanity that was to follow, and one that moved Nazi Germany's ideology from legal and societal ostracization to physical and mortal threat. When Ernst von Rath, a diplomat at the German embassy in Paris, died on 9th of November 1938 from the fatal injuries inflicted by Herschel Greenspan, the Nazi Party leadership were gathered in Munich to mark the anniversary of the 1923 beer hall putsch. Hearing of the assassination, the German government unleashed the Reichspogrom, the Night of Broken Glass, a night of anti-Semitic violence throughout Germany, Austria, and the newly occupied Czech Sudetenland, during which over 1,000 synagogues and 7,500 Jewish-owned shops, 29 department stores were ransacked and destroyed. Many Jewish cemeteries and schools were vandalized. Mobs of SA men roamed the streets, attacking Jews in their houses and forcing Jews they encountered to perform acts of public humiliation. Some 91 Jews were killed in the streets. Police records of the period document a high number of rapes and of suicides in the aftermath of the violence. Local firefighters received orders to intervene only to prevent flames from spreading to nearby buildings. Also in the aftermath, 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and deported to places that have since become synonymous with the Holocaust, to Dachau, Buchenwald, and Sachsenhausen, and a fine of 1 billion Reichsmarks was levied against the Jewish community for the cost of cleaning up the devastation. The images of Kristallnacht are indelibly marked in our consciousness, but equally powerful is our desire to honor those whose lives were displaced and to repudiate the twisted ideology that divided society and fomented hatred. Our event this afternoon dovetails with our campaign to raise awareness of the anniversary by encouraging people to leave a light on tonight in remembrance. For those of you on social media, please do change your profile to our button and tweet using the hashtag #LeaveALightOn. I want to also take this opportunity to remember two special people who recently passed away and who made a searing contribution to Jewish life and the memorialization of the Holocaust. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, the former chief rabbi, respected and authoritative theologian, prolific author, thinker, and spiritual guide. And Lillian Black, chair of the Holocaust Survivors Friendship Association and founder of the Holocaust and Heritage Learning Center at the University of Huddersfield. In different ways, their leadership touched the lives of so many of our members. They will be deeply missed, and we wish their families our sincerest condolences and much strength. In these days of national remembrance, we honor too those who witnessed the Kristallnacht and who then served this country in the conflict that followed. We begin our service today with clips of 6 of our members from around the country lighting memorial candles, after which we will hear from Rabbi Jonathan Wittenberg, whose grandfather was the chief rabbi of the synagogue in Frankfurt that was set ablaze during Kristallnacht, and who was a founding member of the Belsize Square Synagogue. If you have not already received a program for this service, you can find it on the homepage of the AJR website. The best way to watch this service is by selecting Speaker View. And please note that this service is being recorded and will be available to watch again alongside our other recent events on our YouTube channel.
On Kristallnacht in 1938, I was at the Kosher Hotel Tannhäuser in Baden-Baden as a 14-year-old apprentice chef. Last year, 2019, I was invited by the town of Baden-Baden to commemorate Kristallnacht. Thank you.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kirishonu v'sasaf tzivonu lahadlik ner Yom HaZikaron. Also in memory of Lillian Black, who died on the 29th of October, an indefatigable worker for the memory of the Holocaust.
I'm very moved to witness the lighting of the candles. It's extremely humbling. I don't know if you can see, but I'm holding a Sefer Torah, seeing we cannot be together actually in a synagogue. It survived the Holocaust, lost and then found again by soldiers of the Jewish Brigade with the British Army. It bears as an inscription in honor of my late father the words Ud Mutzal Me'esh, a brand plucked out of the fire, saved from the conflagrations of Nazi occupation of Europe. Both sides of my family were closely caught up in the events of Kristallnacht, and both of them, partly or substantially, in the city of Frankfurt, where I understand the lights of the West End Synagogue, where my grandfather served for 30 years, will be kept on all night. My grandfather himself, Rabbi Dr. Salzberger, who was the founding rabbi of Belsize Square Synagogue, was called by the Gestapo the following morning and told to come to the Börnerplatz Synagogue with the keys, which, since he was a liberal rabbi and it was an Orthodox synagogue, he did not have. And as he walked through the crowds of watching Germans towards the burning synagogue, about which the authorities did nothing, he heard them say that the West End Synagogue had been trashed, but that the eternal light, the Ner Tamid, kept burning. People took this as a sign. I found in later testament given after he had managed to reach Britain in April 1939, a report on living under Nazism from the years 33 to 39 by my late grandfather, in which he said the night before they finally were able to flee, he had looked in through the broken windows of the West End Synagogue, and it was a sight he would never forget. But the eternal light kept burning. I'll return to that in a moment. That's my mother's side of the family. On my father's side, my father's uncle, who eventually fled via Britain to New York and lived to be over 100 and whom I met several times, he was arrested and deported. But his daughter, who was a young child, told me how she remembered that they had been living in the flat next to that Bernerplatz synagogue, and how relatives came and rescued them, and she had a glimpse through the broken doors of the charred cupola of the building, which she would never forget. She was sent to Switzerland by her parents, who eventually got out also in 1939. So what is the brand plucked out of the fire? We remember, as we commemorate Kristallnacht, those who perished then and subsequently, but also give honor to those who managed to continue their lives. And I think of it in two ways. My father's uncle became a doctor in New York. He lived at first among the poor of the city who said they'd never had somebody care for them like that. That's the light of caring for each other, whether it's through medical treatment, whether it's through friendship, whether it's through caring for the spirit. My grandfather, Rabbi Salzberger, came to this country and continued his work as a rabbi. And I think it was not just in the synagogue, but in him and in those around him and in all their children and children's children, many of whom are now present now. The eternal light never went out. So may these lights, saved from the fire, continue to guide us, help us, and illumine our spirit and our hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Jonathan, and thank you to our members who lit those candles. As representatives of the community of Jews that fled Nazi oppression, we are profoundly sensitized to acts of terrorism. It was with horror that we witnessed events last week in Vienna, as well as recently in cities across France and not so long ago in the US and the UK. This year, we also mark the 25th anniversary of the creation of the Austrian National Fund and the accession of Austria to the European Union. And as many of our members will know, recent changes to the Austrian Nationality Act will enable more descendants of Austrian refugees to be eligible for Austrian citizenship. We are honored that our first speaker today is His Excellency Michael Zimmerman, the Austrian ambassador, who, with the lockdown fast approaching last week, visited Belsize Square Synagogue to record a message. After Ambassador Zimmerman, we will hear from AGR member Professor Robert Shaw, who fled to Britain on a kinder transport, with his reflections of the 9th and 10th of November 1938 in Vienna. As well as our speakers, I'm grateful to colleagues at AJR and at Belsize Square Synagogue, to filmmaker Mihai Andrei and photographer Adam Stoller, who all played a role in helping us record some of today's proceedings. This includes the chanting of El Malei Rachamim and Eli Eli by Belsize Square cantor Dr. Paul Haller, to whom I'm also grateful, and which will follow Professor Shaw's speech. If you wish to, please stand for the memorial prayers.
It is a pleasure to be back here in Belsize Park Synagogue in a place where worship and education has been taking place for many years without harassment, threats, or attacks. Not all synagogues, of course, have an undisturbed history. The Stadttemple in Vienna, opened in 1826, was ransacked in 1938, and it was attacked by terrorists in 1979 and in 1981. And a week ago, the shootings during the attack in Vienna again started near the Stadttemple. The attack was not aimed at the temple, fortunately, but it once again underlined the necessity of constant vigilance in face of extremist ideologies. The terrible atrocities and crimes which were committed in Austria on November the 9th, 1938, 82 years ago, are today a matter of national shame. At that time, too many Austrians supported an ideology which killed over 6 million Jews. Among them were 60,000 Austrians of Jewish descent, many of them killed by their countrymen or even their own neighbors. It took Austria a long time to be honest about its past, to admit that Austrians were not only victims but also perpetrators. Austria came to terms with its responsibility far too late. In 2018, Austrian President van der Bellen said, "It is our duty and obligation to actively deal with this dark chapter of our country's past, especially when the number of those who are able to give testimony is constantly decreasing." One of the steps taken is an amendment to the Austrian citizenship. Unanimously approved by Parliament in 2019, it now offers Austrian citizenship not only to Nazi victims from Austria themselves, but also to their descendants, second generation, third generation, and beyond. Applicants are allowed to keep their current citizenship as well. And we have received more than 1,500 applications already for this project, about which we are very happy. Today, we commemorate the November pogroms in cooperation with the Jewish communities and organizations here in the UK. And I'm very grateful that we have such friendly and close relationships with these communities, including many Holocaust survivors who stay in touch with today's Austria. We honor the victims of the Kristallnacht today, as well as those who had to flee Austria and Germany in the aftermath. Among them were 2,844 children from Austria on the Kindertransport, with the first one leaving Vienna on the 10th of December 1938, 1 month after the Kristallnacht. Let me conclude with a statement of our Foreign Minister Alexander Schallenberg in the aftermath of last week's terrorist attack. He said, "We are truly grateful for the solidarity of our European and international partners in these difficult hours. Austria will not be intimidated by cowardly acts of terror. Together we will defend our open and democratic societies. This means to protect Jewish life in Austria and Europe, and to fight against any form of anti-Semitism. Our responsibility also includes our relations with the State of Israel and its security. I want to thank the Association of Jewish Refugees for organizing today's event and for its other numerous activities. Together, we will secure the freedom of worship without fear, threats, or intimidation.
Life in pre-Anschluss Vienna was good. My parents and I lived in a large flat on the second floor at Spiegelgasse 21, the Grillparzer house, opposite the Dorotheum, which is now a world-class auction house. In those days, during the economic depression in Austria, I believe it was mainly a sort of glorified pawn shop. My nursery, the Kinderzimmer, overlooked the garden of the Kapuziner Gruft, the burial place of the Habsburg monarchs. My paternal grandpa lived in the same building, but my maternal grandpa lived at Weiburgasse 22 in my schools. My primary school, my Volksschule, was in the Hekelgasse. My second school was the Realgymnasium 1 in the Schubbertstraat. All our flats in my school were in Bezirk 1 in Stad. After the Anschluss, my mother and I moved to a flat at Untitled 27, a street facing the Donau Canal in the second district, the Polstraat. We waited maternal grandmother, Kristallnacht. I shared a flat with a married couple in Praterland 148, also in the Polstraat. We learned from the newspapers and the radio that young Polish Jew Herschel Greenspan, on hearing that his parents had been deported from Germany and sent to the Polish frontier, had shot the German ambassador Ernst von Rath in Paris. This official died a couple of days later. This unleashed the fury of the Kristallnacht, 19th November 1938. The Nazis broadcast that this was as a spontaneous outburst of popular fury, but later shown to have been a well-planned and organized terror campaign. Jewish shops and homes were looted, many Jewish men were arrested and taken to concentration camps. Many others were beaten up and some were killed. In Dachau, a German concentration camp in Bavaria, became a topic of everyday conversation. Many synagogues were set on fire. I recall that I had been visiting Cosmo Prana in a Praterstraat flat, and she walked me home to a flat in the Unterdonnerstraße. It was a relatively short walk and passed through a street, the Tempelgasse, where the largest synagogue in Vienna, the Apolstädter Temple, had been built in 1858. All Paris foundations were completely destroyed by National Socialist barbarians on the so-called Night of Broken Glass, 9th to 10th November 1938. Lots of Nazis, in particular the brown shirts, the SA, were milling about. Cosmo Prana was a small, sturdy, and determined woman. She took me firmly by the hand. We marched past the assembled crowd of Nazis, and I must confess, I've been exceedingly scared. By the time of the Anschluss, the anti-Semitic movement within Germany, with accompanying Nuremberg racial laws, had been in full swing for several years, and these sentiments were fervently embraced by the Austrians. Observers mentioned that the Austrian Nazis exceeded by far in terms of violence their German counterparts. I get my own experience with that. By the time I was at a boarding school, we had a detachment of German SS group quartered within the school grounds. I can remember them in their black uniforms. Although they knew that I was Jewish, I experienced no interest or harassment from them. Indeed, they told me some jokes and told me about an infantile prank they had played on one of their group. The situation with the Austrians, my fellow countrymen, was quite the opposite. One encountered unprovoked aggression in schools as well as in the streets. I still recall many years later, I walked around the street in London and meeting a group of youth, the terror I felt which I could not overcome. They might try to beat me up. The stripping of Jewish assets began almost at once. Organization was the official term for this plunder. The father's shoe shop, F. Pinet, at Kärntnerstraße 36, had to be handed over to a lady with good connection to a leading member of the Nazi Party. The Kärntnerstraße was the equivalent of Bond Street in London, had the most exclusive top end of the market shops. Our shoe shop was in partnership with the French firm F. Pinet. It had predominantly with high-class ladies' fashion shoes. The compensation offered for it was derisory. Even that was never paid. This lady, Fräulein Annie Gerda Hubiger, fled at the end of the war. She was afraid of the Russians. Her head Joseph Zack took over the shoe shop. When Fräulein Hubiger subsequently returned, she and her Zack followed over it. Fräulein Hubiger seemed to have been well connected with the Nazi Party, judging from the season critiques she received from hiring Nazi officials. Fräulein Hubiger, however, did not like paying her taxes, had been investigated during the war by the German tax authorities despite her high-level connections. She was prosecuted for and convicted of tax evasion. We received documentary evidence of this from her Zack. What was life like at this stage of my life? It was most depressing. The Nazis made hell for the Jews. Until that time, I considered myself an Austrian, who happened to have a different religion. Now I was a Jew, a Saudi, a creature who was likely to be maligned and victimized at any moment. Our documents, such as passports, etc., had included the name Israel for any male and Sarah for any female. Thus, I was transformed from Robert Alfred Schlesinger into Robert Alfred Israel Schlesinger. Whereas my mother made a similar conversion from Lily Caroline Schlesinger to Lily Caroline Sarah Schlesinger. Before they were Aryanized, i.e. expropriated, Jewish-owned businesses were looted and anti-Jewish slogans painted on them. SA members stood outside, shut shops, and bullied potential customers to boycott these businesses. Overnight, it became most difficult to earn a living, and people dipped into what savings they had. I was really too young to appreciate all this at the time. Adult Jews were forced to scrap pavements with their bare hands, exposed to many other humiliations. What I noticed were the desperate efforts all the adults made by trying to emigrate. Alas, nobody seemed to want us, being penniless refugees. The favorite destinations were the USA and Palestine. The former issued only a very small number of visas. These numbers were based on national quotas, which were based on previous immigration figures. Such quotas were also quickly filled. The very long wait lists. Additionally, one had to have affidavits from relatives and friends guaranteeing that one would not become a financial burden on the state. Immigration into Palestine was also very difficult. The British government, which held a protectorate, was exceedingly reluctant to inflame Arab opinion. There was little hope of getting an entry visa. As time went on, people became more and more desperate. My father, together with his mother, Cosmo Schrecker, his younger sister's Tante Weffer's family, had visas for Iran and Algeria. My father wished me to join him, but I declined and preferred to take my child with my mother. The pediatrician, that said later, immigrated to Baghdad. Others went to Shanghai, which some years earlier had been a haven for white Russian refugees. My mother wrote many letters to strangers, mainly in the USA. She wrote to people with the same names as those in our family, Schlesinger and Planer, in the hope that perhaps a very distant relative might emerge who would pity on us and provide an affidavit. Alas, all in vain. We became more and more depressed. I couldn't go to school. My formal education had started in September 1931 and stopped in July 1938, after 3 years of secondary school at the age of 13. There was nothing for me to do except to read, and much of the time I didn't feel like reading. It all seemed so hopeless. I recall lying depressed for hours on end on a sofa in our lounge, not doing anything, not feeling that I wished to do anything. Those 16 months, from the Anschluss on the 12th March 1938 until my departure on the 5th of July 1939 by the King Transport to England, the most depressing period of my entire life. Like many other refugees, I tried to forget this terrible past, worked exceedingly hard, and achieved a considerable scientific success. However, I could not forget the loss of my loved ones in the Holocaust. Großmama Prana, Onkel Fritz, Großonkel Emil, Großtante Irma, and Tante Fedora, all of whom were murdered by the Nazis in the various death camps in the East. This will always pain me. Additionally, also the so far uncompensated material losses of my family. I've read very recently the book Reckonings, Legacies of Nazi Persecution and the Quest for Justice by the distinguished historian Professor Mary Fulbrook. He stresses the necessity for citizens of a country to own their past, to openly and honestly examine their historic roles, so that future generations are aware there is a hope of learning the lessons. She concluded that of the three successor states of the Third Reich, West Germany, GDR, and Austria was most reluctant to accept it as past. Genocide should never again become a policy for economic enrichment. It seemed to be in the Nazi era. All of these heinous crimes should never be forgotten, must not be allowed to happen again. I must sincerely hope that future generations will have learned this and can acknowledge and demonstrate the new knowledge of the past.
Shochem Amromim Hamtzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei HaShechinah B'ma'alot Kedoshim U'Teorim Kezohar HaRakia Mazrim Et Nishmot Sheshet Milyonei Acheinu V'Achyoteinu Shemetu al Kiddush Hashem Shalchu le'olamam Began Eden Menuchatam Bal Rachamim Yastirem Beseter Kerafav Leolamim Vitzrar Achayim et Nishmatam Adonai Unachalatam Veyanuchu Bashalom Al Mishkavam Venobar Rishru shel hamayim berak hashamayim tfilat Adonai. החול והים, רישוש של המים, ברק השמיים, תפילת האדם. אלי, אלי, שלא ייגמר לעולם. החול והים, רשרוש של המים, ברק השמיים, תפילת האדם. החול והים, רשרוש של המים, ברק השמיים, תפילת
Thank you, Ambassador Zimmerman, Professor Shaw, and Cantor Heller. Our next speaker is Hannah Lessing, the General Secretary of the Austrian National Fund. Even before the attacks last week in Vienna, we had asked her if she could record a message from the Stadttemple in Vienna that in the end proved possible, thus enabling us to connect directly to the history we are commemorating. Among Hannah's roles, she is a fellow delegate to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the IRA, whose work the AJR actively supports. In doing so, we strongly endorse the recent thought-provoking statement of the IRA president, Michaela Kuchler, in which she encourages the exploration of digital remembrance opportunities and of how new technologies can be used to help further Holocaust education. To this end, the final recording today will be of a short film extracted from the AJR's Refugee Voices archive, introduced by Project Director Dr. Bear Lefkowitz. Together with our My Storybooks and our Educational Grants Programme, Refugee Voices forms part of our commitment to ensuring that future generations can learn about the Holocaust.
For I cannot think without remembering, because I cannot want without remembering, because I cannot love, because I cannot hope, because I cannot forget without remembering. Ladies and gentlemen, this poem by Erich Fried is called Against Forgetting. It has accompanied me during the last weeks. This ceremony is a stance against forgetting. I feel deeply honored to be allowed to speak to you on this night, which is held in remembrance of Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. I would have loved to come and speak to you in person, but the pandemic has turned our lives upside down. When I talk to survivors all over the world these days, I feel that for many, a lockdown means reliving traumatic experiences that they knew from the time of their persecution. Isolation, heteronomy, insecurity. All these feelings suddenly come back to life. And as if that weren't enough, the waves of terror have hit Austria, giving us an idea of what it means when incomprehensible violence breaks out over our seemingly stable reality. So many people need our help in these days. Let's support each other wherever we are, no matter how far away. Tonight, I'm speaking to you from Vienna, from the Bima in our Stadttempel here in Seitenstädtengasse. In these first days of November, the city temple again witnessed a violence and frenzy that deeply shook Vienna and the people of our city. That I am able to record this message to you in this symbolic place, only 2 days after the heinous terrorist attack, just a few steps from here, is a sign that hatred and aggression will be overcome. I appreciate being able to join you, at least virtually, at Belsize Square Synagogue, a place funded by survivors who found refuge in England, many of them from Austria. Kristallnacht. For German speakers, this is a dazzling, irritatingly trivializing term, suggesting images of glittering and sparkling crystals, almost like from a fairy tale. This expression is far too poetic to describe events so horrendous. Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, forms part of the darkest memories of Jews all over the world. The violence against Jews was orchestrated across the Third Reich in both Germany and Austria. On the night of November 9, 1938, all hell broke loose, a turning point of evil. These violent events have remained engraved in people's memories for 82 years now. Every year, during these November days, the veils between the past and the present become more permeable as we remember the night of broken glass, a cataclysm that heralded the end of an entire world. Vienna, the grand imperial city of a bygone empire, was once home to approximately 200,000 Jews. This world no longer exists. During the Third Reich in Austria, 65,000 men, women, and children fell victim to the Holocaust. Remembrance of them is kept alive here at the Vienna City Temple with the call of Zachor, remember. Austria will also remember them on walls of names, a memorial which is currently under construction in the heart of Vienna. Another 130,000 people were expelled. They had to leave behind their homeland, their families and friends, their entire lives, to live as refugees in a foreign land. Most of them never returned. For decades after the Holocaust, the crimes of the Nazi past was shrouded in silence. My grandmother, Margit Lessing, was among the thousands who perished in Auschwitz. She was a pianist. I never heard her play. All I have left of her are her story and some faded photographs. But her legacy, her name deserves to be preserved, as do the stories and the lives and the stories of the deaths of the millions of victims of Nazism. When I started my work at the fund, I had a recurring dream that I would discover a trace of my grandmother somewhere in the many files in the archives, that she might, by a miracle, still be alive, that I could bring her back to my father. Of course, this remained a dream. But at the National Fund, for over 25 years, we have dedicated our work to memory and learning from history in the spirit of remembrance. We provided help to subsequent generations who are seeking to learn about their own family. We published the life stories of survivors, passing on their memories to the next generations. This is especially important today at a turning point in history where the voices of the survivors are growing fainter. The lives of the dead lies in the memories of the living. The memory of Kristallnacht leaves a bitter taste of loss, fear, and dislocation. From the ashes of over 150 synagogues destroyed in Austria, we can only salvage fragments of the past. Today, on this special occasion, I would like to share with you a very personal story I experienced 5 years ago. It is the story of the Rimonim that forges a personal connection back to that night. In the 1930s, my ancestors, Bertha and David Lessing, dedicated a pair of silver Torah finials, Rimonim, to their temple. They were antique, originating from the 19th century, the Biedermeier period. Their son Heinrich had died at a young age, and the Rimonim were a votive gift in memory of this beloved child. I imagine how much these Rimonim must have meant to his grieving parents. Then, the Nazis burned the temple down and looted the ritual objects, among them the Rimonim. They were lost without a trace in the turmoil of history. Decades later, one day in 2015, the former president of the Vienna's Jewish community told me about a pair of Rimonim he had seen in an Israeli auction catalog. Hannah, these Rimonim bear the name of Lessing. Don't you think they might come from your family? That's how I, by pure chance, learned of their existence. But maybe nothing happens just by chance. As we would say in Yiddish, it was bashert. So in March 2015, I went to Israel to retrieve the Rimonim and bring them home to Vienna. 77 years had passed since they had been looted during the night of broken glass. With their return, a part of my family's shattered history emerged from the dark. For more than 20 years, I had been dealing with the past and the memories of others, scarcely thinking of my own and my family's lost memories. Finally, I brought the Rimonim home to my father, who at the age of 93 saw them again for the first time. My father, as usual, didn't say very much. But I know deep inside, this moment meant a lot to him. Because we cannot overcome without remembering.
My name is Bea Lefkowitz, and I'm the director of the AGR Refugee Voices Archive. I'm sorry we cannot be together physically today, but happy that technology allows us to connect to each other digitally. I'm standing outside Belsize Square Synagogue, where we would normally gather to commemorate the 82nd anniversary of the November pogrom, often referred to as Kristallnacht, which took place on the 10th of November 1938. Most of us know the history of this significant event. 1,400 synagogues and prayer rooms, Jewish cemeteries, more than 7,000 Jewish shops and 29 department stores throughout Germany, Austria, and the Sudetenland were ransacked, set alight, and destroyed. More than 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and taken to concentration camps, primarily Dachau, Buchenwald, and Sachsenhausen. About 1,300 to 1,500 people were killed, many more if you include the many suicides and the death of deported men in the concentration camps. Many of the 250 interviews who we interviewed for the AGR Refugee Voices History Archive experienced Kristallnacht, and many of them talk about it in detail in their testimony. One interviewee captures the essence of Kristallnacht. She said, "From that day on, everything changed." Today we will share the powerful testimony of two of our interviewees, Kurt Marx, who was born 1925 in Cologne, and John Itzbicki, born 1930 in Berlin. As today we're all going through times of uncertainties, strong political divisions, and fake news, it is important to recall Kristallnacht as a turning point of the legalized violence of the Nazi regime towards Jews. It is important to remember what can happen as a result of propaganda and the victimization of one particular group. In the longer version of the interview of Kurt and John, they don't only talk about the perpetrators and the bystanders, but also about the upstanders. They talk about the neighbor who warned Kurt's father not to be in the flat on Kristallnacht, and the porter of the building who told John's parents that their shop would be attacked at 7 p.m. that evening. And also the butcher who did not want to give his weight to the Nazi thugs. The power of testimony goes above a singular event. The act of listening makes us witnesses of the November pogrom 1938 and reminds us that listening in itself can be a form of social action.
I went to school as normal on my bike. On the corner of our street was a toy shop, which was there until fairly recently, strangely enough. It's been a toy shop all these years. Only recently has it been changed. When I came out, there was one of the glass windows, one of the windows had been smashed. Well, it could have been an accident, I don't know. I saw it. And there used to be a game called, English is called Ludo, Mensch ärger dich nicht. And there was this thing flapping in the wind and it says Mensch ärger dich nicht. But I could still see it. Anyway, I carried on to school. When I get to school, gold commotion, smoke coming out of the building, teacher outside the school. No school today. Didn't know why. Go home and whatever. Well, you don't have to tell a boy twice, go home, no school. It wasn't such a pleasure for me, you know, it's always day off is very good. So I thought, well, before I go home, I'll go and visit my uncle, the butcher, you know, which is not very far from there. When I get there, completely destroyed. Windows smashed. Inside, there was a large shop with all marble smashed to small pieces. And then suddenly I said, first, shop on the corner where we lived, then the school, now this. There's something obviously wrong somewhere.
I was having my afternoon rest and woke up to hear a lot of glass being smashed. And I raced to the window and looked out, and I saw that the leatherware shop opposite had been smashed. The windows had been smashed. And just then, a woman who was clearly quite old and who was obviously in pain from arthritis or whatever, walked past the shop, and as she did so, she screamed, "Dirty Jews, they should kill a lot of you." And the screaming went on and on. And one jagged piece of glass, which was just hanging by a thread, came loose and crashed down on her head. And that evening, my grandmother was there, and my parents were still in the shop. It was business as usual as far as they were concerned. And it was starting to get dark at about 6. And I walked to the balcony and stood there and looked out. And in Berlin, things went round very quickly. The gossip, the talk. And the street started to fill with people opposite our shop. And they waited. And at 7 o'clock, the Nazis are always very timely. If they say 7, it's not 1 minute past or 1 minute before, it's 7. I could hear them marching and singing a sort of horse whistle type song. And they marched to the shop, whistling, and threw the first stones and bricks at the window. And the stones and bricks bounced back. It was a thick, curved window. And nothing broke. So what they then did was they went 2 doors away to a butcher's shop and went in and said, "Can we borrow your heavy weights?" And the butcher said, "What do you want them for?" And they said, "Want to break the Yid's windows." Says, "In that case, you can't have them. Get out." So instead, they smashed his glass counter and knocked him down, unconscious, and took the heavy weights and went back. And they smashed the window. And I knew my parents were in there. And they picked up glass and threw it through the window at, I presumed, my parents. And I screamed and screamed and screamed. And it left me with a hoarse voice that's been with me ever since.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you, Bea. And now, as is our custom, we will conclude proceedings with Rabbi Wittenberg leaving us in the Kaddish. This will be followed by Cantor Heller leading the Adon Olam, after which this event will end. Thank you all very much for joining us.
These haunting testimonies. I recite the Kaddish on behalf of us all with a full and heavy heart. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah v'alma divrach chirutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei dichol Beit Yisrael v'agala v'zman kariv v'imhu Amen. Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevorach Le'alam U'Le'almei Almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnasei v'yithada v'yit'aleh v'yithalal Shemei Dikudsha Brichu Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechmata yamiran mi'alma v'imru Amen. Yehei shlama rava min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. Oseh shalom v'imromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen.
Adon olam asher malach beterem kol yetzir nifra lehet nasa behefzo kol azai melech shemo nikra ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה והוא אחד ואין שני להמשילו להכבירה בלי ראשית, בלי תכלית, ולא העוז והמשרה. והוא אלי וחי גואלי, וצור חבלי בעת צרה. והוא ניסי ומנוס לי, מנת כוסי ביום אקרא. בידו אפקית רוחי, בעת אישן והעירה, ואם רוחי גוויעתי, אדוני